So you took the train up from where?
DC and
You live
Baltimore.
here now, or do you
I
still-
I live up here, but I still have the restaurant, and my parents have a house in Baltimore now because my brother lives there. So I'm kind of all over the East Coast.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy when you can get on the metro line here, but
Yeah, it's fine. I was actually living up here and working down there for a few years, and that was hellish because I would come back and forth every week. So, and that's not my
that is hell.
cup of tea to do that.
Do you want to stay here, or do you want to get something to eat?
Did you order food already?
I did, but I can cancel
wanna-
that. I just ordered like an appetizer.
No, I should probably grab something to eat.
Do you want to eat here, or do you want to move?
I like talking here because, I've been performing, my voice is pretty weak.
Yeah.
Getting in a loud place makes me
Right.
it's hard on the voice, so I like the quietness of
Here's good for me.
Cool.
It's good for you.
I chose it because I knew this place wasn't very crowded
Yeah.
usually, and
Yeah.
easy to talk. Not because I'm normally staying here, which I am, but for these shows we got, I'm paying for a full band.
Yeah, I know, I
Six guys
saw it.
performing. It's very expensive, but luckily, 2 doors down from the venue is just this. You know what these pod hotels are like?
Yep.
They're really useful, but then it's
I
only $100 a
stayed
night.
in
so-
one.
Really?
And it was
Yeah.
Are you talking
really.
about the one in kind of
Lower East Side, Orchard Street.
Lower East Side?
It's a
Okay.
teeny tiny room, right?
You've got a queen bed, and in order to get around it,
Yeah.
you have to put one knee down. So it's like
I
it's
stayed.
right
really?
close to the wall.
I stayed in one, and it was crazy. It was like staying in a motorhome.
So how are you doing today?
Good, yourself?
Very well, thank you for asking.
Yeah, but they're clean and they have the bathroom. And
Perfect. I can try this a drink?
what I would like is this? Can I see a menu?
Sure.
Here you go.
Oh, thank you. Taylor, you want anything to lunch?
Look, I have that dog.
I'll give you some time to look over.
All right, thanks a lot.
Sorry, your food should be over here.
Great, thank you.
Cool.
So where are the gigs?
Well, these are the solo record is not released yet. So these were just purely to generate some interest.
Oh, cool.
They're at this little place called Rockwood Music Hall. It's a real hipster joint.
Yeah.
It's cool. I remember that was like one of the first places I went when I first came to New York. It started out as like a tiny venue. I think he's expanded all the way across.
Where is it?
It's like my living room. It's probably this big as this area here.
Lower
Lower East Side.
Yeah, I think it's on Orchard Street, isn't it?
No, it's on Allen. Well, it's got 2 entrances, yes.
Yeah.
But now they've turned it into like 3 stages, and each one just has rotating bands every night.
Huh.
So they've built up a real like following of local people who like to hear music, and it's a crapshoot whether that music's going to be interesting or not. Because I think they wedged us in there, it's more of a showcase place,
Got it.
which is fine for me. This project needs to sort of develop organically, but it's just very expensive to
Yeah.
have 6
Yeah.
musicians. But this kind of music, you can't, it's real hard to get the point across because so much of like hipster culture is like getting up there with an acoustic guitar, diminutizing, Hi,
How's it going?
I'm Greg. I just got here, so.
Perfect.
Hey, Carter.
How you doing?
Nice to meet you. And
Jason, nice to meet you.
This is Taylor.
It's okay to...
yeah, have a seat. When does the album come out?
March 10th.
And would you describe it as an old timey?
Well, it's inspired by old time music, but that means nothing to most people
Right.
because a lot of people don't make any distinction between bluegrass, country, Americana, roots, soft rock, etc. And I generally don't like to pigeonhole music, so I don't
Sure.
care. But but in order to properly put it in context, when I say old time music, it might mean something totally different to other people. So old time to me means stuff that came before country music, that inspired all the great country music that came out of the 40s and 50s. So I guess you could say, Woody Guthrie fits into that template. He's kind of, but he's not like, so the quintessential old time that was brought forward to my generation was really my parents' generation, because they handed that music to me. There's a guy called Doc Watson, and Doc Watson brought old time music sort of to the folkies of the 60s. And Doc Watson could play it and was a master at interpreting those songs. And and another quintessential old-time act would be like the Carter family. And what the Carter family did was bring their style of music, which was family-oriented. You play it around your house. You sit on the porch and you play the music.
Yeah.
And you bring it forward and pass it on to the next generation. And the Carter family did that with Johnny Cash, obviously.
Caesar salad?
I'm going to have the seared ahi.
Your height tuna?
Thank you. Is that a salad, right?
No, it's an appetizer.
Doesn't come with any salad. Is there a side salad I could get with that?
Sure, we can make a side salad.
I think
We
so.
also have a roasted beet salad, which I have
Ooh, I like that.
with a little goat cheese. It's very good.
Should I do that instead?
Whichever you prefer.
I have to ask my manager. I'm joking.
So we like the height tuna and the beet salad, or just the beet salad?
I'll take them both.
I recommend it because the height tuna is very small.
This is my big meal of the day.
Sorry, man. You said Caesar salad, right?
I found it interesting in the book. You talked about sort of like the adaptive reuse of within religion and culture of architecture, like churches and things. And then when I saw your show the other night, I noticed the one song that was, I guess, hymnal or gospel music that was really an
Time of
need, an adaptive reuse of religious
The
music
good
for a
elements of-
secular.
yeah.
For a secular, it was like a vessel for a secular message, which was, really interesting when you were talking about that in the book.
I'm glad you see the parallels, because most people, they don't understand like how there's any bleed over between my different activities.
Well, we've talked about it before. I think with the consilience, I look for those sort of that fabric and theme in your work of things that cross boundaries. And it's interesting when you're in a punk band and writing books about evolutionary theory or population wars and things like that, and then old timey music. Like, what's the thread that goes through all those fabrics, and how do you translate that to different populations of consumers, right? Like,
in a sense, that's a crass business way of looking at it, as the artist can never admit to being sensitive to. And honestly, I'm not that good of a businessman. I don't pride myself on it, so I can just say, I focus on the art. But I appreciate I appreciate someone who can synthesize that, and but I do believe we live in an important time for an artist. You can't just, it's not even the old days where you couldn't have access to different, if someone liked fine art during Van Gogh years, you're not going to ever reach the people who like music, right? But today we have so many more avenues where we can do that. So I do a little bit of it in academia, but I believe the people who follow academic work also like music. I assume that to be well-rounded culturally nowadays, you kind of have to.
Yeah, I was gonna say you're probably not too, your activities at Cornell are not too driven by business.
Not at all. But I do find it as a useful and rewarding way to still, share a message, a vision of the world that I think can provoke people to think, and that's interesting.
does that many different sort of cultural outlets become hard to manage. I mean, as someone
yeah, of
who
course. I mean-
tries to do a lot of things, I find it increasingly more difficult, and I want to have pastimes too.
Yeah, you set yourself up for constant disappointment because you feel like you should achieve more, and if only you'd focus in one area, you could get that work done and achieve what you really want to. But it also tends to leave yourself a lot of headroom in all those other areas. And say, I'm going to dabble in this, I'm going to try it, and I'm not expecting it to be a smash hit, but I'm going to learn something along the way and refine it next time.
Well, I guess if you find success early in one thing, it leaves you the ability to also like pursue other avenues.
Hopefully. I mean, it's kind of a privilege. I got lucky. You still got to pay the bills with something. So I got lucky that my main source of income continues to grow in popularity. That's just luck. That's not because I'm a genius. Although a lot of people love to throw that word around. It's just kind of silly, in my opinion.
Not all luck. I think there's a number of factors.
A little bit of skill. But
I want to switch a little bit to the book, but we can, like we've talked about.
why don't you first give me a little summary of who we are having our conversation with?
Jason is a friend of mine who's going to take some photos.
Cool. I noticed you have a mirrorless Leica.
I do. Yeah, I sold all my Nikon gear because I just had a kid 6 months ago, and prior to having the baby, I wanted to carry less other stuff aside from my child, so I sold all of it and I just invested it all in this thing.
Yeah.
And I like it quite a bit. It simplifies.
I have an old M6 and I have a new
nice.
I have the new digital M.
The new M10.
Yeah, and I just recently almost challenged my wife to walk out on me, which she had every right to do because I purchased a Leica S. If you know anything about those,
I don't. Is that the big one with
I'm
the
embarrassed
heavy,
to say how
super heavy
much
body?
they cost. It's the medium format digital.
Oh, yeah.
It's an embarrassing thing that.
But I'm sure the images you could see every pore.
I still have. Yeah, exactly. It's a lot of detail, but it's a learning curve.
Do you
Yeah.
trade up or you collect?
Yeah, I don't get rid of old stuff. So my old stuff is probably as valuable as this new stuff.
Yeah, Leicas
When
hold
it's
their
supposed to,
value
like,
for sure. I have an old. My grandmother gave me a Leica from the 50s, I think, 40s or 50s. She was a refugee from Ukraine and met my father. My grandfather.
So she had an old school Leica.
She did.
That's
an old
cool.
school Leica from Germany, and they met in Munich. That's where my dad was born.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. But just to give you guys a little more context, I actually, so I run the creative department for a digital. Digital is kind of like a throwaway word now, but a creative agency essentially.
Okay.
So we do design work and website work and all that kind of stuff.
Cool.
So yeah, that's the short version.
And this is Carter. It's actually our first time meeting. I struck up a conversation with Carter over email and text in the past week, and I had mentioned that I was interviewing you and that I had to, or not had to, I was going to read your book this week, and Carter downloaded the book, or bought the book and read it, and yeah.
Just, as background, I was about to get on 10,000-mile flights, and so it was perfect timing that we were talking on Saturday morning.
Cool.
And so, but I immediately, after reading the first introduction before the first chapter, I saw tremendous synergies between the types of things you've done in your life and what I've been doing kind of throughout my life as well. And
Cool.
exactly along the lines of what you're saying. Just as background, the reason why Jeff originally reached out, I've done a lot in U.S.-Russia relations. And so I've...
Hard luck.
Great, thank you.
So may I get you anything to drink as well, apart from the water? Sure, which sounds like we like English breakfast.
So do you have...
So basically, I got involved in some controversies because I think with a lot of going back to your war theme in the book, there's sort of this long-standing predisposition against Russia. And, I was talking with Jeff about I don't know if you ever saw Oliver Stone's Untold History of the U.S.
Oh, I did watch it, yeah.
But that's, that kind of gives you a lot of background as to how things went off the rails over the last 70 years with Russia. And so
interesting. I didn't look at it from a Russia-centric point of view, but
about the first half of it, well, really kind of throughout, because there's been proxy wars up to this very day.
Interesting.
But, so but just as background, so I do a lot of international business. I guess that's kind of more in line with your music career. But I also have taught for many years at New York University and other colleges, and the exact same things you talked about. The war versus breaking out of that mindset is kind of a core theme for me. So I look forward to that conversation, and I'm a fan of your music as well. So I'm taking down notes on Doc Watson because anyone that is curious to hear.
Yeah, I think if you like old-timey stuff, that he's the best, and he's got a huge catalog. So. But yeah, I mean, Jeff had mentioned you were coming, so obviously I Googled you and I found out some stuff about the oil industry. And I don't know if you know this, but I have a master's in geology, and I was trained.
I saw that. I was curious.
So everyone in my department was going into oil and gas exploration in the 80s. So I have a different view than most people do about the oil industry, and it's an easy target for a lot of shallow thinking people. But
well, just as a disclaimer, most of the stuff you read about me, you can kind of.
Well, yeah, I took it with a grain of salt. But the interesting thing is the idea that what doesn't really come out in that is the fact that oil and gas is still, fossil fuels are still the backbone of the drivers of prosperity in this world, and they're poised to be for a very long time. And you can't say that as a liberal thinking person without being vilified. But I grew up in a department where it's common knowledge. And yet these were professors and the people training the future oil and gas industry people, my cohorts as students, my friends, who are liberal-minded people, smart people, and yet there's this stigma attached that it's somehow the enemy of humanity.
Well, there's just
now having said that, there's a lot of dumb people in every industry, and the guys, a lot of the guys in the field. And I knew guys who ran oil rigs, and these are smart guys. But they also had crews and they also had workers who didn't give a damn, and they'd cut your throat if they had the opportunity. And they don't give a rat's ass about how fresh or clean the water is. So the oil and gas industry deserves a lot of their bad reputation for letting that, you're responsible for your employees. I'm sorry. But the people I came in contact with were all smart people, so I assumed you were one of them.
Well, and look, just as a disclaimer, and it goes back to the point I was making about the don't believe what you read in the media. I've actually focused a lot in recent years on renewables, in terms of that shift, and also, one of the most incriminating points that have been brought up by Harry Reid and others against me is my relationship with Gazprom, the largest gas company in the world. And what's
from what from what I've read, that's not a very clearly stated relationship.
Well,
nobody really knows what. No one really knows what your relationship
is.
From what I read,
I advised them for many years, and I was an investor, and that's why Harry Reid came after me, for example. But
for conflict of interest or something?
It just sounded bad. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a couple shares of that. American depository. So it's nothing. But what's interesting about it is, when President Obama talked about some of the improvements in terms of lower emissions over the course of his administration, those years, that was all primarily driven. If you look at the key drivers, that was part of the shift. That was driven by the shift towards natural gas, which is a much cleaner source relative to coal, etc.
Yeah, but so anyway, I mean, I have some insight to that too. I mean, that's a mythology, and I've got colleagues at Cornell who are advisees who will tell you they've done the numbers, and natural gas is no solution. Natural gas is terrible in terms
It's
of its
handled the
damage.
wrong way.
But it's always handled the wrong way, is what I'm saying.
But they're not by everyone, and it goes back to the
All
good and bad.
I'm saying is to be touting that as a clean source of energy is wrong.
Well, the point
And
is, if you look at what
creates-
Obama is showing in terms of those emissions,
And I'm not arguing with you. I'm just saying it creates misinformation
Yeah,
because people don't know what to believe.
yeah.
The only real clean sources of energy are things that we cannot derive. We cannot derive enough power from to continue our comfortable way of life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So natural gas, we can continue our comfortable way of life, but you're going to have a drastic consequence to the atmosphere.
I'm not disagreeing at all. All I'm noting is that the statistics that he's quoting was driven solely by that. There was a little bit, they subsidized a few solar facilities,
Yeah.
wind farms, etc. But that was not, if we're talking facts, that's not over the course of those 8 years was the major driver that led to that statistical
I see.
differential.
What was?
Natural gas, the shift from coal to natural gas. So again, you're absolutely right that there are other key drivers that need to be factored in, and as you're noting, Environmental Defense Fund and some other nonprofits have done a lot of research on this about some of the new technologies and some of the better approaches that can limit the harmful aspects of it.
What I think the question we should be asking, the most important question here is, can we continue our comfortable lifestyles with offshore wind and solar? I think that's a crucial, really important question that I've never once heard asked.
Well, it's that same self-interest element, right? Where people complain about off Long Island that they don't want to look at these wind farms, which, if you fly into Copenhagen or,
Yeah,
I don't find that, ugly.
That's part of it, but here's the thing. Who cares what you have to look at? I mean, I'm a big advocate of not obscuring vistas. So I do have some sensitivity to that. But even if you build the biggest wind farm, can it run anything more than a domestic washer and dryer and a computer for the year? I'm sorry, guys. The answer, you're going to be shocked to know, it ain't much more than that.
Really?
It ain't much more than that. So how do we make up for it? Fossil fuels. And I'm not an advocate of fossil fuels. I'm just trying to get the information across.
Right.
That what we are proposing, I mean, these people just think, yeah, I just bought a Tesla, I'm saving the world. No, man, you're not. The batteries have to be mined. The trace elements need big diesel machinery to get those battery. I mean, and
also for wind, it fluctuates. Same for solar. It's not
right. It's not going to be
sunshine
consistent.
24 hours a day, right?
Yeah. So, but what I'd like to know, I'm ignorant. So, what I'd like to know is, can we build those solar facilities in the Mojave Desert? I believe we could really do some significant. We could cut into the budget a little bit of Southern California, our energy needs, if we would develop those solar plants. But the question then becomes, should it be government or should it be private sector? And I'm not a big advocate of government. You know, that's where I probably differ from a lot of Republicans, is that I think the government is good at building big infrastructure projects, and the one we should focus on is having essentially a government, at least partial involvement in a government-private partnership to create solar facilities. Because I got news for you. I'm very skeptical about the people who not the people, it's not their fault, but the companies that are advocating for people to put solar panels on their roofs. It just sounds like anyone who's ever owned a house and had to maintain shit, that's just another thing to go wrong that I'm going to be responsible for maintaining. I got a leak in my roof because of the solar panel that was screwed in, or whatever. You know, to me that just sounds like a headache.
Well, I mean, it's the
Let
same
the government
it's the same with shale, where
save it,
new technologies are creating these continuous improvements, and so that's a moving target. It keeps getting more economical and more attractive from that sense. That's a key factor. So.
What I'm saying is you're adding a headache and you're saving a few cents on your electric bill. Sometimes we forget what great conveniences we have. You know how simple it is? Anytime you want, go turn on your TV. Anytime you want, go turn on your hot water. At the end of the bill at the end of the month you get a bill for that. You never have to question the reliability. It's always, the grid is rock solid. How does that work? I don't know, but I'm willing to pay, a few bucks for it. And we're proposing to drastically overturn this.
Just as a way of further introduction, contrary to the portrayal in the media and other sources, I actually I worked for Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan as a liberal Democrat from New York, Congressman Les Aspin. I'm a pretty bipartisan guy, so I don't. The thing that originally drew me kind of in this most recent year is helping to kind of shift the U.S.-Russia relations from this ongoing 70-year war, which Oliver Stone has helped to expose with that documentary towards a new direction. So that's what kind of got me in that.
I mean, I'm just hearing this for the first time, but it seems to me the reactionary knee-jerk people would say, oh, well, then they're mad at you because you're helping Trump make Russia our ally, essentially.
Exactly.
That's probably the knee-jerk.
Precisely. Well, I mean, you just look back, and again, I think it was episode 3 in the Oliver Stone series about the McCarthy period. It's precisely that.
Yeah, I think when you say knee-jerk reaction based on that, is that a goal, or was that a goal to assist the administration or any administration normalize ties between Russia and the U.S.? I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing if you look at it through a lens of broader coexistence, right? But it becomes more complicated when you look at it through the lens of Democrat and Republican and nefarious influence on the elections, which you roll your eyes, but most people are beginning to not roll their eyes and say, like, okay, fine, I don't know what's going on, but it seems like something is going on, and what role does this person play and this person play? So I don't think it's, I don't think it's people's knee-jerk reactions come for a reason, right? And,
well, it goes back to the point Greg was talking about, having accurate information, right? And if there's this constant, there's a big New York Times article by a couple of guys I know today about, some of the steps that the Obama administration were taking to, plant this information.
Yeah, I saw the headline. I didn't read the article yet.
well,
But, I mean, this is kind of if you compare the impact, you're talking about impact on the election.
Sure.
Compare the types of steps they took against people like me and the negative taint that had over myself and the candidate I was supporting. If you look and kind of compare it side by side for that table, it's a much harsher impact against relative to anything the Russians would have done. Because essentially what they're doing is, exposing some information that was pretty well known about nefarious steps that Mrs. Clinton and her team were taking. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, which is why you're here and you're here. For me, is that I get most of what I understand about the world through, the news and sources. But I like to also go as much as I can straight to sources, of knowledge on certain topics. And if as much as I enjoy the ability to reach out to people who understand these things far more than I do, and can spread those, spread those ideas.
Exactly. Well, that's part of the reason why I enjoy Greg's book and saw a lot of overlap with things that I've been talking about and writing about for ages. So.
Well, these books, have a way of seeping slowly into the consciousness of people who read them. It's never going to make a big impact. It will never be a bestseller if you are writing something that is contrary to the sort of dominant narrative. Yeah, and so a synthesizing type book is rarely a bestseller, but they tend to grow in importance as people think about it more.
Yeah, I found this book especially, which I got to say is intense, and I mean that in a really good way. Is it's a complicated, and really I found, anti-conventional wisdom, anti-establishment in many ways. Especially kind of the two sort of underlying themes that I to be honest, I still have a chapter to go, but it is, in terms of free will, the ideas of free will and competition, you're really pushing back on with the idea of free will being semi bullshit in many ways. You're pushing back on religion, frankly, which is, I don't know what percentage of the population of humanity, and then with competition, you're pushing back on ideas of capitalism and really on evolutionary theory, not the basic tenet of evolutionary theory, but what people have taken those ideas and done with it, right? So that's almost the entire world that this book pushes back on.
Exactly.
The ideas of. So
it's poised for failure.
basically that's what I'm saying.
That is true. I mean, I realized that when I undertook it.
It's poised to piss people off, I would say, but
it goes back to the overlap with your prior,
to
your
get people,
your original career, right?
Yeah, that's the point. Is to make people question their most cherished beliefs. If you're not willing to give up your most cherished beliefs, then you're living in a fantasy, and that's
punk as fuck in the nerdiest way possible, I gotta say.
Yeah. But it's absolutely
I would expect
the way
nothing less than a professor and a punk rock musician.
It's the way you have to live your life. There are certain things that I might delude myself. Self-delusion is important. For instance, in family life.
Oh, and then
you know
that
what
was
I mean? I mean, if you're in love with your wife, you gotta go in there with blind faith. You gotta support everything.
Well, that was.
And with your kids, you have to believe that you're doing something that has higher purpose,
so
even though you don't have any evidence that that's the way it's going to turn
But do you
out.
wear two hats then, like a biologist hat and like a cultural, personal hat, where you're looking at a group of, your own family is not as as an ant farm, but as your family, right? In these
Yeah.
personal relationships,
Otherwise,
but the
you're
world.
not a human being. A lot of scientists suffer from not really knowing how to. There's certain times you have to be.
So is that something you have to turn off? That like kind of scientific approach to the world? Did you leave it at the door?
Pretty natural. It comes pretty natural because we have this thing called the limbic system. You know, we have an emotional core of who we are, and if you know, at least if you're in the average, you have feelings for other people, and those feelings you can't always treat scientifically.
Right.
You go with
Or
it.
the lollipop, sir. Okay.
But certainly for philosophical stuff, that's what we're talking about here. When you say that it's a book that's contrary to all those other narratives, that's philosophy.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, a lot of philosophy is bullshit, but a lot of it is what we write songs about too. You know, it's interesting,
Yeah.
and it goes to the core of how we think, and it's organizing your thoughts, organizing your intellect. And so, a lot of people it's really true. A lot of people go through life never questioning their most cherished beliefs.
Well, it's part of the reason I think you came to your positions on war. And, you know, because, and
Honestly, all of
how many
that-
people stop and think about that, right?
But all of that came out of my evolution background. You know, and understanding where this field came from, because it's probably one of our youngest sciences. You know, obviously neuroscience is probably the youngest, but evolution is right up there with one of our. It's still like developing. It's in its infancy, and it came from these notions of competition. Darwin wouldn't have come up with natural selection if he hadn't read Thomas Malthus and the Malthusian idea that the human population expands much faster than the resources was the basis of natural selection. There's going to therefore be competition at every step of life's pageant. There's going to be competition because there's not enough resources. They simply don't grow. The resources grow arithmetically. Populations grow exponentially. You cannot ever have enough resources, and that's the foundation of this idea of competition. Well, because it's a young science, it sort of evolved alongside mass media. As mass media grew, the collective readership grew, and informed people grew. The population informed, citizenry grew, and so they started adopting ideas, cherry picking really, from different sciences, not just evolution, but from astronomy and from other biology, and we created this sort of collective worldview. And competition is at the core of that, and competition is what drives everything today. And that's what I'm challenging. I'm saying, what if Darwin hadn't read Malthus? What if he had read someone else that emphasized cooperation, assimilation, and these are all things, if you go out there and look in nature, you see plenty of evidence for it. As much evidence, I'm arguing in the book, as you see for competition. Would that have changed our collective view on economics and government?
It
It's a
definitely
fascinating
has
idea.
socialistic and communistic undertones, right? Like
Yeah, but I'm not. See, I never studied Marx, so I don't even know if it has.
I have studied Marx, and I can assure you that they don't dig into any of it.
Yeah.
He cuts across various disciplines, but
He probably never cites any original thinkers like Malthus.
yeah.
Whereas, if you study evolution deeply, it doesn't take long until you follow the chain of thinking from Darwin and Malthus. So
Is it considered dangerous or controversial to sort of take the theories of evolution, I guess, below into population groupings? Population just a term for group, right? Group of whatever, right? of organism in any
Well,
sense.
there's a formal definition, but I don't know if we have to get into it.
No, but below, I guess, like a species level into
Racial groups.
well, that's the most obvious, but
And
governments
I don't mean human racial. There are subspecies and races in a biological sense, yeah. But what are you saying?
is it I mean this is sociobiology, right?
Yeah.
This is what I guess E.O. Wilson kind of got
Yeah, you
water
talked to
thrown
E.O.
in his
Wilson.
face
Yeah.
in the 70s or 80s over that it just
Well,
gets
that was
into,
adopting biological phenomena
right.
and using them to explain cultural human phenomena. That's what people tend to get real nervous about. Whereas E.O. Wilson said, why get nervous? We're a species just like them. Why can't we look at ourselves the way we look at natural species? So there's a lot of ethical components to it, but, you know, on what you should, you know, we can go out and decimate a population of mice, but you can't do that with humans. So, I mean, there's ethical concerns, but considerations. No, the greater controversy is what I'm trying to do in the book, and it's a controversy from within the field. Because if you challenge the tenet that natural selection is the driver of evolution, you will be ostracized from the community as, you know, people. And the way my colleagues do it is they just don't talk about it. They don't talk about your book and they don't want to hear about it. But Lynn Margulis, this great scientist, was married to Carl Sagan, and she recently died. Lynn Margulis made a career out of the stuff I'm talking about, symbiosis and assimilation of species, and she believed it was the driver of diversity, the driver of evolution. And she was not ridiculed for it. She was too smart to be ridiculed, but it was politely ignored. And I think that was a shame. And you know, she's written a number of books with her son, Dorian Sagan, about this assimilation and symbiosis as being the driver of evolution. But again, it's false. So how could they adopt that? You know, don't forget, it gives evolutionary biologists great status if they champion competition, and then the economists have to consult them. The economists, it gives them great status. The economists have to consult the evolutionary biologists because they're the ones who invented the idea of competition. It comes from the field of evolution.
How often do you see that happening, though?
They get asked all the time to comment on this stuff. You know, and it's, you know, there's not a lot of, evolution's not a big field. It's a pretty small field. But, you know, the guys who are the leaders of it get asked all the time about economics and stuff like that.
Have you pushed these theories into that sort of popular economic and popular cultural realm to
No, because this book took me 5 years to write. It was very frustrating. You know, I think it comes through in some of the chapters are pretty hard to read. And I could have gone into that and it would have doubled the length of the book. It's probably, you know, it's fruit for later picking, and maybe I'll do it in another book sometime. But the social implications of what you're saying.
Well, I'm hoping is
a big
that this could you know spring you know beyond you, just like a field of people who are willing to take that leap of some of your ideas into implications beyond, right?
Yeah, I think it's important for geopolitics.
That's
Well, that's what I was going to ask. So you
specifically.
said that it doesn't. There's a lot of carryover in the field of economics. I'm thinking through, having read a lot more in international relations and
Yeah.
political science. I don't see as much. Am I missing something, or is there much cross-disciplinary between?
You're saying you don't see a lot of references to evolutionary.
Yeah.
Well, let me
you
jump
don't
in
have
there.
to.
I did. I mean,
Yeah.
when you
So,
were
for
talking
example,
about
who is-
stewardship of population intersections, right? Like, and I will give you a quote. You said, "How wonderful it would be if we could, on a global level, make the decision simply to control and occasionally limit population interactions rather than trying to exterminate everything we consider evil." Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, isn't that absolutely relevant to what's going on right now with this countrywide country band and building walls and things that where you're basically, it's like a bonsai tree of responsibly, rather than eradicating populations like Muslims or whatever. Some would say responsibly, others would say absolutely not, making these decisions that limit and counteract interactions between populations, here meaning nation states, but really not, religious groups and things like that. I think it's absolutely the most relevant thing that everyone is talking about right now. So,
But that's, yeah, so you have to acknowledge the assimilation that's happened so far. In order, it's ridiculous to not just take a walk around the city and realize that how do you want to break this population down? Do you want to do it genetically? Do you want to do it culturally? I don't care how you break it down. Everywhere you look, you're going to see a very short, recent history of assimilation. So to untangle that assimilation is incredibly unrealistic, first of all, and it's almost impossible to do in any meaningful way to the people who are trying to do it with. So,
Just to be clear, when I was saying there's not as much cross
sure.
disciplinary, I was referring to until his book.
Yeah. No, as you're eating Japanese ahi,
made in America.
made in America,
That's right.
caught who knows where.
Yeah.
But no, I found this book of any I've read recently to be, not on the, I don't think not necessarily purposefully relevant to everything that's going on, but absolutely as relevant as anything I've read in ages.
Well,
So,
thanks. Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, that's what I try to do is recognize the narratives that are being told. That's kind of what people respond to. It's this idea that they don't question what they believe, so therefore they're following a narrative, even if it's subconscious.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can identify some of those themes in the narrative and challenge them, it's going to be kind of a timeless piece of work, because people will have to come to that question eventually.
More from a methodology standpoint as well, right? As opposed
For the
to
most
just
part,
thinking about
yeah.
it, issue by issue, right? That's, as you say, that makes it more timeless.
And it's getting harder and harder to get people to, that's the thing. When all is said and done, that we look back at this era in our cultural evolution, and we're going to see what the internet brought us and social media brought us. I think people are going to go, how did they know anything during those years? During that particular time in history, because there's so much disorganization in the information. I mean, don't forget, knowledge is organized data, right? It's got to be for it to be shelved as human knowledge. It's got to be predictable, repeatable. All the basics of scientific validation have to be there.
And you're saying there's no organization
There's
whatsoever.
no organization. It's complete chaos.
It's
How did they know
insanity, and
Yeah.
we live in this. I mean, who knows
how did
what
they know
it'll be
anything?
like 10 years from now, and hopefully
Hi, Danny,
some
I'm
of
in a
these
meeting.
big
Can you call me
internet
in an hour?
companies will start. I mean, I think they're actually starting to, as we speak, get a handle on,
I'll send you a text.
who is disseminating just things that are outright lies, and try and figure that out. But we
Well,
live
that's
in
the
this
thing.
time period of,
I-
in the last, 100 years, that the barriers the natural barriers that have separated us have pretty much are gone with an airplane, right? And,
Yeah.
non-sailboats.
Sure.
And so we went through that, and then all of a sudden slammed with all the information, disorganized.
Mm-hmm.
So, in the last 20 years, we're dealing with all being thrown back together, which is globalization basically, and then the internet, which has thrown all the information, and it's like, you guys sort this out.
Right.
And it's maddening too, I think. I mean, we haven't really figured that out, but the collective consciousness is stunned by this.
Yeah, and the problem is, if you ever attempted to, as a company, if they attempted to streamline knowledge or try to limit information, then they get accused of being censorship.
Right?
So so they have to therefore open the gates to any
Organization,
asshole's
right? Like,
opinion, you know.
oh, totally. And
So it's like, oh no, that's valid. Well, it's not really valid. Not all opinions are valid, you know. It's this idea that every kid gets a trophy. Well, but someone won the game. I'm sorry. You know what I mean?
hey, you're the one arguing against competition. What are you talking about?
No.
No, I know. I'm
I
just kidding.
specifically say it
I know.
belongs on the football
I know.
field. That's where competition belongs. It doesn't belong in the explanation of how our countries have come to be organized the way they are.
You care for a cup of coffee as well?
No thanks. I'm going to stick with this. Thanks so much.
So you okay with it?
Yeah, I'm great. Thank you.
Okay.
Cool. I was, thinking a lot about your, I guess, refutement of the idea of free will, and I don't know, because personally I agree with you very much so that the majority of that I don't think that it's free will is either if you have free will or you don't, that it's some sort of a spectrum where the majority of the decisions we make and these things choose us, we don't choose them, right? Like religion or they're
Yeah, part of your cultural environment is
your
going to
location,
dictate
what your
a lot
parents,
of your
your
behavior.
history, your DNA, all these things make up what we consider this thing, the idea of choice, right? Choice is really not, I may choose Coke over Pepsi, but that's probably because my mom drank Coke and I'm genetically predisposed to like that combination of cinnamon and sugar or whatever it is,
Yeah.
right? And then marketing, what I've been marketed to.
Right.
So I really found that as not really those ideas as refutable, but in most people's eyes, I think probably most people's eyes, that's almost blasphemous to say those things, right?
Well, it's blasphemous literally if you're a religious person, because that's the greatest gift God gave to you, but he didn't give to the other animals. He gave you free will. And if you refute that, you're going against really the dictates of the church, centuries old dictates of the church. So that is literally blasphemous. But even for a secular person to suggest that you didn't have a choice over the Coke that you chose today, you might as well be excommunicated from society because you're so far off the spectrum of normalcy. But again, it's because people don't challenge, they don't ask themselves, where does this notion come from? This idea of free will. Well, I'll tell you where it doesn't come from. A sound education in evolution. Because anyone who even takes an introduction to evolution learns that organisms have developed over millions of years. So we have ancestors that probably didn't have as much freedom as we have, because by some fluke, their brains just didn't develop to the size that ours developed to. So our consciousness is more highly developed than other animals. And that tells you right there, well then, if we have free will, it must be on a spectrum. Then the chimpanzee has a little bit of free will, but not as much as us. Okay, well then let's go to the dog. Does the dog have free will? Well, probably not as much as a chimpanzee. It gets to be a stupid, absurd argument of when did free will come into existence, if it's just a development. So you might as well just say, well, you've got two choices. Either we have it and none of those things do, or maybe we don't have it. We just haven't. We're further along on the developmentals, the behavioral spectrum that evolution has created. That's the one I prefer to call. Now, if you hold a gun to my head and say, call it free will, then I'll say, fine, that's free will. But that's not what the philosophers are arguing about. Okay.
Have you used that analogy before?
No.
No, that's that's a pretty ironic one.
Yeah. But I'm telling
Call
you
it free will. Oh,
Yeah.
it's free will.
All right, it's free will. But that's not a very satisfying, way of getting to the issue, because
That's your coexistence
yeah,
idea.
exactly. But the philosophers are arguing about something much more. Yeah, but either they're arguing biologically or they're arguing purely philosophically.
I wanted to ask you about vaccines because you talk a bit about how vaccines control the degree to which populations coexist, and you can preserve the necessary diversity of life. Does the current like anti-vaccine I guess theory? I guess it's a theory. Does that just bug the hell out of you? Is that, or is you consider
Yeah, I mean,
uninformed, or is there something to be debated there?
Ignorant people don't bother me anymore because it's just so prevalent. But certainly, the idea that vaccines are some kind of a conspiracy is just, it's ludicrous, and it's a sad statement on
So there's no, I mean, that's just basically irrefutable science right there.
how well. Here's where people get their misinformation, because they don't know anything about viruses, and they don't know anything about bacteria, and they don't know anything about diversity or mutation. You know, all those things that I just listed, if they don't become the most important topics of discussion for the 21st century, then we will virtually de-evolve back into the Dark Ages. Because those things touch on so many important modern issues.
So you're saying where they don't get the information, where do they get the information instead?
I think they get it from.
What's kind of conventional wisdom?
I think they get their information from the fact that these organisms that cause disease some of them are very difficult to nail down. So some vaccines are not as effective as the polio vaccine, which was a slam dunk. And the ones that aren't effective then get major news stories about them. Here's, they've forced all these people to get vaccines and they didn't work. Well, that doesn't mean that vaccines don't work. It means we didn't figure out the mutation rate of this organism, which actually was a lot faster than the vaccine can keep up with. So they're getting... Now, I mean, this touches on the idea of fake news, but it's not... I don't want to devolve into that. I would like to say something about fake news. It goes back to what I was saying, that this era in human existence, where so much information is out there, it's easy for Donald Trump to use that to make his claim that, that's fake news, because people are so confused. So I guess we should believe the president when he says it's fake news. That's where that comes from. Unfortunately, the people who have the knee-jerk reaction to anything Donald Trump says, they're kind of falling into a trap here, because they should just back off for a minute and let him call it whatever he wants to call it, but don't react to it, because by them reacting, it makes them look like they're defending the misinformation, and they're saying no, it is true. So the vaccines is actually a good one, because those are the knee-jerk people are the same ones who might say, no, vaccines really work. But these other people who are skeptical have a right to be skeptical. They just don't have enough of the right information. They have a right to be skeptical, because they're saying, hey, wait, the Zika virus, how come it still persists if vaccines work so good? Which is kind of an ignorant way of looking at it, but I understand where it comes from. It's because we don't understand enough about the organism yet. But the concept of vaccination and the implementation of vaccination is crucial to maintaining a healthy population. And, the interesting thing is, whenever they claim, okay, this, as I point out in the book, it's extremely hard to get rid of a population of anything. Even when we say polio is essentially wiped out, it's not. And if we let up on the vaccinations, it will make a comeback. Smallpox was wiped out. It was contained, as I point out in the book. You can't wipe it out. You can contain it. You can get it in such small portion of the population that it's effectively not going to make a re-entrance as long as we continue the program of vaccination. But if you start letting up on that, it opens the door for more of it to spread. And sure enough, smallpox is making a comeback.
What about flu?
Yeah.
What about the flu shot? How do you feel about that?
Again, the now how I feel is not how I teach about it.
True.
Because I don't.
As I say, not as I do.
No, because I hardly ever get a flu shot. Just because it's a pain in the fucking ass to go.
And what do you teach about in that context?
What I teach is what I'm saying here about how important vaccination is. However, I also always remember to point out that you need to know the organism you're going after. And
Right.
that ties into population wars because people just think, oh, it's a germ, it should be eradicated. Enemy. Well, yeah, it's easy to label something an enemy and try and throw all your ammunition at it, but you got to know something about the enemy. So in this case, the flu is an incredibly crafty devil because it mutates so quickly. And by the time, and then it gets into a little bit of implementation strategy. By the time they get the flu shot out there to all the different pharmacies and stuff, the next flu season is already on its way because those germs mutate so quickly that last year's germ is already mutated into a new organism. So it's very hard to get one step ahead of it. But that doesn't mean you should question how good vaccines really work when you and by the way, as more and more genetic mapping and understanding of these organisms increases, the implementation will become more seamless. So you have to remember that
It'll become more what?
seamless. The science is continuing to advance as well. So it's just silly to be, there's so much you can be skeptical about in this world. If you want to be a skeptical asshole, I'm kind of a skeptical asshole, but not about vaccines. There's a lot to be skeptical about, but that's not one of them.
Not on your list.
No. But then again, I'm a biologist, so.
Well, yeah. Science.
Which I think it should be mandatory. Biology should be. Mathematics, I'm sorry, guys. They say, oh, we don't know enough about math and science. Well, yeah, we don't know enough about science or biology, if you want to even include it as a science, because biology is such a big field.
Yeah, but going back to your interdisciplinary, did you have to do a lot of math?
That's why I hate it so much. They made me struggle through that.
Okay. Let's wrap that.
Are we doing photographs? Or
Yeah, I wanted to
do
do
you
a
wanna
couple.
anything?
So yeah, let's let me just.
Yeah, I could talk all day about this, but
I know.
Sorry about that.
No. What did you enjoy that?
Yeah, it was, he's a good guy.
John, may I take your order?
Yeah.
I'm okay.
Do you know what you want?
Yeah, I might get some. I'm for whatever reason, in the bottomless pit today.
I'll take a double espresso.
Sure.
Ice water.
Sure. Right for the table.
How are those sliders?
They're good.
Yeah, I'll
We
try.
also, if you want to see the lunch menu, we can do it too.
No, I'll do the sliders. Yeah, because I already had something to. Just water would be great. Yeah, thank you.
You enjoyed?
Yeah, it was really good.
Cool.
Great guy.
Good. I'm glad you came.
I hope he wasn't too put off or.
No, not at all.
Yeah,
No,
that worked out
no,
okay?
no, yeah, he's super cool. So, yeah, I figured maybe we could change tack a little bit and talk because like I was saying earlier, I like to figure this stuff out from the sources rather than through the filter of call it mainstream media or some people would say fake news or whatever. I try and read what I think is not fake news, but I want to know a little bit more about. And feel free to not talk about what you don't want to talk about.
Let me give you a brief summary of the 10-minute conversation I had where I was kind of back and forth with a major reporter, major news agency just now. So what I explained to them, they were asking, you've seen the headlines today, and
I actually didn't. But
well, Attorney General Sessions, the allegations about conversations he may have had with the Russian ambassador.
Yeah.
And so
I saw that this morning.
Okay. So it's been sort of nonstop on all the.
I imagine your phone's blowing up. Yeah.
So thus the delay in getting back to you. Okay, so 2 quick points. Number 1, I don't talk about internal discussions that I had in the campaign. Just in the interest of, I'm like public enemy number 1 now, thanks to what you read in my letter.
Yeah.
You know, Mrs. Clinton kind of portrayed me as, you know, the bad guy, given the fact that, you know, without question, as I alluded to therein, I had the closest relationship with the Russians, kind of based on my work and
Yeah.
the fact that I worked in the Pentagon previously doing U.S.-Russia arms control negotiations. It's something I've done for the majority of my life since I was, you know, since 1993
Right.
when I graduated Naval Academy. So, you know, but I don't talk about, you know, I don't want to kind of sully other people's names by sort of saying that I am, you know, then it leads to another 9 million questions to other people about, oh, what about this guy Carter Page? He says he knows him. You know what I mean? So I just don't go there. You know what I mean?
So
That's
I'm more, like I said, I don't spin and I don't want to spin things certain ways. I just want to know more of an understanding of what the issues are about without getting into the politics of the issues, right? Like, what is Gazprom? Is that Gazprom? And what is Rosneft, right? Like, that's the most basic. Thank you. And I don't think people even understand.
they don't understand
that,
at all.
right?
Absolutely.
And so if you haven't developed a basic foundation of like what
You're
these
so
things
correct.
are, you can't. And even who you are. I mean, I've never even seen anybody ask you like what like.
Exactly.
Where are you from? Like what,
Yeah, exactly.
you know? So it's developing the just like
Well, and
it's a
they jump
convenient
to
narrative.
lies,
Like
you know,
you need a bad guy and you need a good guy, and nothing is ever that simple. That's why I love the show The Wire, because the bad guys were the good guys and the good guys were the bad guys. And cops and robbers are a really good example of that, right? Like without robbers, there's no cops eventually. So it's like everything's way more and the cops are a lot of times the bad guys, right? So I want to understand like who are these? Who are you? Of course I want to know that on a personal level too, because you seem interesting and you seem nice. But like, what is Rosneft and what is Gazprom?
So Rosneft and Gazprom, respectively, are the 2 largest oil and gas companies in Russia.
Okay.
So Russia, they are. I'm not sure the exact stake, but I believe Rosneft is either majority owned by the Russian government or significantly owned by. I'm not sure. They've been going through various privatization processes. Part of the reason that, you know, there's a controversy about me here, which I'll kind of dig into
Sure.
in a minute. But, you know, part of it is state-owned, part of it is owned by international and Russian investors, right? So,
For better or for worse, right?
well, you know, it's funny. I mean, some of the largest pension funds in the world, you know, are investors in things in each of those companies. You know, it's publicly available information.
Sure.
I'm not sure. Don't quote me on what's what, but I mean, if you go to Yahoo Finance or there's other
Thank you.
databases, you know, it's pretty public information.
Right.
So again, so basically, Gazprom is on the gas side, Rosneft is on the oil side.
Okay.
Gazprom is more dominant in the natural gas sector than Rosneft. Well, that may be a subjective point as well, but there's a more diverse range of other large Russian oil companies as well. But again, Rosneft is kind of most prominent, as Gazprom is, on the gas side. So, in terms of myself, I mean, I similar to Greg, right? We kind of have different sides of our brain, and I think those in activities we've gotten into in life, which sort of have various synergies.
Right.
between the two sides. And for myself,
Renaissance men, they used to call it.
I won't claim such a great title, but you know, I tried. I mean, the primary driver for me, and you know, why did I originally get involved or interested in Russia? You know, when I was growing up in the 1980s, you know, I came in off the street in my on my skateboard, and I watched, you know, in the 1980s the summit meetings between Reagan and Gorbachev, where they're negotiating arms control treaties to kind of decrease nuclear weapons. Again, another kind of similarity with Greg, right? And I thought, you know, this is the beginning of a new era and something that's of the highest significance and importance for the future of both of our respective countries, but also
And the world. Yeah.
Exactly. Just given the kind of threat.
Yeah.
Going back to that Oliver Stone documentary
Absolutely.
we've talked about. So, you know, I was very motivated by that, and it was something that really kind of inspired me. And, you know, watching one of the summit meetings between the two leaders of the Soviet Union and the U.S., I saw a couple of naval officers standing behind the president, you know, U.S. naval officers. Well, that's interesting. Maybe that's some way of kind of getting involved and helping out. So that was one of the main, you know, I had other reasons as well, but it was part of the reason why I wanted to go to the Naval Academy in Annapolis.
Cool.
So I ended up doing that, and I was a political science honors major, and so I, you know, was always interested in politics and international relations, and ended up, like I mentioned, I was intern for Patrick Moynihan, World Senator from New York, and then my senior year, I got chosen for this fellowship called the Trident Scholar Program, where you do independent research, and I studied, you know, Strategic Defense Initiative, the SDI program that Reagan did.
Yeah.
And talking about the links between Congress and you know, how secrecy determines the decision-making process for the respective branches of government, you know, and affects congressional decision-making. So I wrote, you know, a long piece on that, which has interesting overlaps with the kind of questions that everyone's talking about today. But, you know, I graduated, and it turns out the guy I was working for my senior year was Les Aspin. And he was,
Anything else right now, gentlemen? Are you okay?
Good.
he was named by, I graduated in '93, so halfway through my senior year, there was the election of Bill Clinton. And sure enough, Bill Clinton asked him to become his first Secretary of Defense.
Okay.
Basically, all the people I was working with ended up heading over to the Pentagon, and I was able to kind of, although a very junior guy in the military context, had the chance to go with that flow. So, served 5 years in the Navy, and then went to the Council on Foreign Relations, where I also continued studying kind of regional issues related to this area. And related to the Caspian Sea region. So, which is kind of, you know, the Stans, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan,
Right.
Uzbekistan, and then Azerbaijan, key export fields there. So, but you know, I served my 5 years in the Navy and then got out, got into business. So while I was at the Council on Foreign Relations, you know, I was working on my MBA.
Oh, cool.
Again, similar to Greg, I sort of, even when I was at the academy, you know, similarly, I was, although studying part of my brain, you know, I was also, I like doing real work as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, the things I was doing on Capitol Hill, while I was still a student. And then, at the Pentagon, I did my master's at Georgetown.
Cool.
That's what I was doing too. And then did my MBA while I was at Council on Foreign Relations here in 1999. And then, like him going for the PhD, I did that while I was a banker in Moscow.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
How
So
long did you live in D.C.?
So I was only there, a year and a half, almost 2 years.
And in Moscow, then you moved to Moscow for that?
No, I did. I finished my 5-year term in the military, mostly in the Mediterranean and Persian Gulf. But then I moved over to. Then I got the fellowship here at the Council on Foreign Relations.
Oh, that's here in New York.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I was a banker. Started in London, and then moved in 2004 Moscow. Although my bank didn't have an office in Moscow, it was the fastest growth market in the world. And so, me and another guy went over there to open up the office.
So you understand the complexity of Russia way more than the average American, and I think I do probably a little bit understand it probably.
From your
For the girl I date, and I just try and stay informed, and I've tried to catch up a lot more on lately, and I don't think that people really have done that. They've just assumed, because we were in this post-Cold War, mindset, but people are, it was a convenient enemy for 40 years, and now I think it's like, oh yeah, those are still the bad guys, right? But
Well, I think what happened, look, there was an era, like with Reagan, as I was alluding to, kind of inspired me to get into this stuff to begin with. There was an era where there was a warming for a while. I think what's often forgotten is that, Washington has made a lot of mistakes too, right? And there were various missteps. I mean, they were talking on Morning Joe on MSNBC this morning and some of the other networks about NATO enlargement. So basically, the Soviet Union ends. We had NATO kind of covering Western Europe, and then so starting, with the reunification of Germany, which was small NATO enlargement, but kind of moving NATO into East Germany, and then in 1999, the first major NATO enlargement occurred with Poland.
And that's
Hungary.
threatening to Russia in the sense, right?
I've written about this. So imagine, let's kind of put yourself in the other guy's shoes, right? Imagine, say the Soviet Union won the Cold War and the U.S. lost. Now the Soviet Union wants to, and there was that thing called Warsaw Pact, right? Which was kind of the alliance between, Moscow and the, sort of satellite states, or states in Eastern Europe. So let's say, Soviet Union wins the Cold War. 1990s, they decide, well, let's make Canada and Mexico members of the Warsaw Pact. You could imagine how that might,
Freak out. Yeah.
Well, especially given sort of a mindset in Washington now, which is always very confrontational. So, I think viewing things from other people's perspectives is useful. And the term that's always used, to describe me and some other people that have kind of a more pro-engagement viewpoint towards Moscow is we're called apologists. We're apologists for Moscow's position. To the contrary, it's just finding.
Well, but I think that the problem in a vacuum, like, it all makes sense and it's easily explainable, right? But from my understanding, which is limited, is that the what do you call it? The interference with the election, and I don't think it affected the outcome. I just don't. I think that Hillary Clinton lost for a number of reasons, but to the interference with the election, even if it was minuscule, it's not good optics. I always, me limitedly, but I always seem to talk about it in terms of PR, public relations, right? Like the interference with the election and the timing of that is really detrimental to the situation, right? Because in the opposite effect of like the way a lot of people, because now how can you lift the how can Trump lift the sanctions,
Okay,
right?
so here, let's, this is from my document, right? This is kind of the comparison. So let's talk about the impact of those quote-unquote interference.
Yeah.
Right? So a way of thinking about it, so compare the impact of that interference versus the interference and the kind of the steps that the Hillary Clinton's campaign took against myself and some of my colleagues, right? So let's kind of, in a way to think about it is, material non-public information. What came out, it was information, and it was, let's talk about in each of those two instances. So for, in terms of this, the issue that you're referring to. Yes, okay, WikiLeaks, what came out? It was some non-public information. So admittedly, that is non-public information, right? That was things that was not known. Some information came out on that. Think about the same thing. Also, some non-public information came out against me in the national media. But the difference is that, that fake dossier that came out, it's completely made up, made up by the Clinton.
Two things I would say. One is Hillary Clinton lost, so it doesn't really matter,
Well,
right?
it did,
To you, but I'm talking about.
No, hold on a second.
Yeah.
If we're talking about impact, have an influence on the election.
Yeah.
Well, let me
I see
finish
what you
this
mean.
statement,
Yeah,
right?
go ahead.
The shadow or the clouds that were over the Trump and his organization during the campaign. To prove my point, these clouds continue to this day, right? And this is kind of a negative
On the Trump administration or on you or
at it.
both? Or
Both.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm nothing. Who cares? I'm a, it's Mrs. Clinton. I mean, they've led to some of their policies and steps have led to a lot of death around the world. I lost my friend Chris Stevens. He was a friend of mine. He's the guy that lost his life in Benghazi, Libya. Right. So okay. So on that level, just in terms of the information, it's much more. That's okay. There's non-public information in both senses, but the information against me, which was illegally given to the government, because false evidence, which is obstruction of justice, is something that she gave to the.
Yeah, but my whole point there is, when you lose, you don't matter anymore, right? Like I don't. How is it relevant in that? It's like making fun of the handicapped kid in the school year.
No, but hold on a second. So then why, when you turn on, I bet if you switched over from
Sports,
ESPN to MSNBC or CNN, it's nonstop. It's been going on all night since yesterday and going back weeks and months now against, this stupid Russia issue, which is completely made up by these lies. And again, it's a criminal offense. To give false evidence in legal proceedings is criminal activity. And so that's what we're dealing with here. Okay?
So I agree with you that those things are, when you give false evidence, that's a prosecutable offense, right? But so in the context of the Trump administration, why isn't there a consensus that the public is owed the understanding of what was false, and why isn't, from people like inside the administration, why isn't there that, this is bullshit, let's try this under a congressional investigation or whatever to prove that Hillary Clinton and or the Democrats and or whoever's behind it is like a bunch of assholes who are making shit up. I mean that's the disconnect that I don't see. Like why isn't
one disclaimer.
Yeah,
Again,
and I'm not saying you're speaking for
well, and that's
yeah.
the key point,
Yeah.
right? So, and I'm not. Based on these lies, I decided that I'm going to step away from the campaign back in September. So I haven't had any.
No, yeah, totally understand it. I'm not asking
I'm
you
not-
to answer for anyone. I'm just going through this all in my head to try and figure out like what the fuck is going on because I don't know.
Yeah.
And
Well, and
the American
that's the thing,
public doesn't know, and
it's-
some of
it's
them
a
don't
big-
care.
And when there has been statements out from the White House today, right, where if you look at, it's a big game, right? All they want to do, and there's articles in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, a bunch of major newspapers saying, well, the FBI is looking into this. There's questions. So
Yeah.
it's enough to kind of, even though it's completely baseless.
When you say
the one
completely
guy-
baseless,
okay, so there's
I don't.
one guy. There's
yeah.
one guy. I forget Swalwell or something. He's a congressman from California, but he put in some act where let's spend $4 million on this investigation.
Yeah.
Again,
But what's wrong
it's a
with
com-
that? That's
well,
what I
but
don't
it's a
understand.
complete waste
If
of
it's-
money. If
Yeah,
there's
but we
anything
waste.
substantial.
Our government wastes a lot of money on a
Right,
lot
I
of dumb
understand,
shit,
but,
right? But
you
if
know.
there is, I'm just saying, I don't understand what, if anything, if someone said some bullshit about me, I would want to sue them for defamation and prove in the court of law that what they're saying is bullshit because my reputation depends on that, and
Well,
that's
I
why.
I guess my point.
Yeah, and I'm not
I
asking.
guess my point, I'm just my own personal perspective. When you go through that process, it's a painful process.
Oh, I
You know what
totally agree.
And so, in terms of cost-benefit analysis, okay, $4 million. Let's just pour that money down
Right.
the sink. Who cares? But it's a. It's just.
We've gotten to a fever pitch now where it's like, okay, this isn't gonna go
Well,
away,
and that's
even
the
if it's
game.
false
That's
or
the
not.
game that
Of
they're
course,
playing,
of
that's the
course,
game
and Republicans do the same thing,
Okay.
and Democrats do the same thing. It's politics. I don't like
yeah,
it, right?
exactly.
But at the end of the day, once it becomes public awareness, you have to get to the bottom of it, right? And then, but what happens
so
now,
let's go
right?
back.
What
Okay, but
happens
let's-
with sanctions?
Okay,
and things
you're
like-
getting.
I want
to a,
yeah, go ahead.
So this goes back to. Let me just finish the thought
Yeah.
in terms of comparing the real influence
Yeah.
on the election, and that's materiality, right? Nothing. The Russians. Okay, they may or may not have. Let's assume. There may be some evidence that they tried to influence by giving this information.
Giving him,
information
giving
on
him.
the
I don't
WikiLeaks,
think they
on the
right
WikiLeaks,
that
okay?
and breaking in whatever.
So, but
I don't
what-
think they
what-
tampered with voting, and I think
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
so much
And that-
misinformation
and
about that.
that's-
That's important.
That's important as well. But materiality,
Yeah.
is that information material? So let's look at WikiLeaks first of all. What was the conclusion of WikiLeaks? What did we actually learn from WikiLeaks? We learned that the Clintons are dishonest. That's something that was pretty well established a long time ago. I think you just have to look at polling and you kind of understand that there's no surprise there. Let's think about materiality from the Trump team's perspective and myself, right? By putting all these lies in with their private investigators, that again created a big cloud.
Michael
over the
Steele or what? Or no,
This Mike, yeah,
Steele, whatever his name is. Yeah,
the MI6 guy
the
in
the
London.
the
You know.
the spy dude. Yeah.
Yeah. So that
P-gate.
that is something that really did have a negative impact on me. Again, it just puts a shadow, and you see the impact. Yeah, I mean, the point I was making here only gets more proved every day. And I think if you look at the New York Times article today about that we were just referring to, that they have the Obama administration giving all this information,
Spreading
Creating
it.
a trail.
creating
Yeah.
a trail. That was done to kind of further there was a quote in there that I sent the authors of that New York Times piece where they kind of mentioned a couple of reasons why they did it. Really, the bottom line, the main reason they did it is to discredit, the Trump administration.
Yeah, but
and, you can kind of,
again, I go back to the point of like when you're the loser, nobody fucking cares what you did,
Well,
right?
but
Like
you say that,
but
but,
of course,
it's
on a personal level, I
nonstop.
get that, but
It's
like,
nonstop, And look, okay, case in point, and maybe this goes to your prior question.
yeah,
President Trump, either last week or the week before, he had that long press conference, 120, or 80-minute long, hour and 20-minute
Yeah.
press conference. A good chunk of that was wasted with these stupid questions, asking the same old conspiracy theories.
that's
So the
why
question-
I'm
the
saying,
question
like,
is-
how do you, at
well,
this
the
point,
question
how do you stop that? You don't just, it doesn't go away, because it's not because of the media. It's because a certain subsect
but
of the
the media
population
drives
want
it.
to
No,
know,
but
but
the me-
they,
yeah, but
but
the
they're,
media drives
but the media is based on what people want to be reading, right? Because if it was boring about tax reform,
Yeah.
if it was some mundane thing
agree.
about tax reform, people wouldn't give a shit and they
I
wouldn't
agree.
click on it,
but
right?
there's a cost, and and Greg was
I agree.
Greg was talking about it as
Yeah.
well, right? Where it's knowledge, real information, versus this joke process, which makes
and I'm
again,
not arguing again to you this, but I'm arguing as
to
a
go.
okay. Can you just
Sorry.
snap a couple photos?
Sure.
While we're doing
Yeah.
while we're talking?
Apologies. Thank you. Can you throw me my hat?
Yep.
wow, we looking? Are we just looking at you?
Yeah.
Gesticulate. There you go. Just the exposure here for a second. Swivel backlit. Alright, that's good.
I was glad that he was a Leica nerd because it like definitely like was a good opening to the
A little
conversation.
icebreaker, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
More than a Leica nerd. He spends a lot of money on Leicas.
Yeah, I think the one he's talking about, the medium format, is upwards of like 20 grand or something.
Well,
Yeah.
got to start a punk band.
Yeah.
Well, when you asked the question, well, you can really tell the
That's
difference.
not
He
a
was
prof-
like,
Yeah.
well, maybe.
That's not. You don't buy that on a
My bet
professor's salary.
is, you wouldn't. The quality is not going to be that much different than what.
It's a decent piece of kit, but when you shoot in the medium format, essentially it's like a magnifying glass.
Yeah.
Right? It puts everything into a very fine sort of detail. Anyway, nice meeting you.
Yeah, great to meet you too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll hit you up.
Yeah, hit me up.
Oh, I think I'm gonna see you in the next few days. I'll reply to Jason tonight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's just go bowling.
We're supposed to see him soon.
Yeah, I'll hit you up later.
Okay.
Thank you, dude.
Yeah, of course.
Appreciate it.
No problem.
Anyways, my point was the easiest way to put it to bed. And I'm telling you this. I'm telling what's his face, Chaffetz. It's like just do an investigation, and if there's nothing to investigate, then everybody shuts up and moves on to whatever the next.
That's
whatever
kind of
the
what
I'm not
that's what I
saying
said
that the
to Judy
Democrats are going to
Woodruff.
stop
That's what I said to
throwing.
Judy
Yeah.
Woodruff. Let's have that conversation because that is going to be based on the kind of core principles we're talking about. They're going to go down in a
And with the egg on their face, right? Like
big
egg
time,
on. I
big
mean,
time. I mean, it's going to prove what a sham this was to begin with. And it's also going to show how dishonest and how corrupt the entire system had gotten, right? If you roll back the tape, and again, Oliver Stone kind of touches on this a little bit. There's been a couple documentaries. I forget the name of this Showtime thing. Not a documentary. What's that guy's name? Bryan Cranston?
yeah, Brian Cranston.
So he had this thing about the relationship between LBJ and Martin Luther King Jr.
Oh yeah.
Did you see that?
I didn't see it, but I'm familiar with. They had. They had the dossier on MLK, right?
Exactly.
Like a
Well,
whole,
that's
and
exactly the same thing that they've done against me, right?
Take another specimen, or?
No, I'm good. Thank you. Just to check whenever.
here's the difference. And it's very interesting historical, putting it in historical
Perspective. Yeah.
J. Edgar Hoover, who was pretty infamous with
Yeah.
some of his
Oh, absolutely.
political tactics coming after people. There's a bit of a switching places with this, or trading places a little bit. If you watch that movie, J. Edgar Hoover was the one kind of doing these illegal moves and kind of civil rights abuses against MLK, right?
Thank you.
In this instance, the roles are flipped, where it's actually the executive branch of government, or the politicians, including Capitol Hill, who are pushing for the FBI to go into these investigations against private citizens like myself, based only, again, false evidence, criminal activity, which is obstruction of justice going back there.
Which, so basically, and again, I don't know enough about any of this. Basically, what the entirety of what, I guess who would be accusing you of something?
Again, all the political.
But you're being tried in the media, right?
Yes.
So, which is that you gave a speech, which is what you sent me the context of, right? I read
That was
the speech.
Appendix B.
But that you met with someone and were offered the brokerage fee on. Let me try and explain it, and I'm probably the brokerage fee on the 19% of not Gazprom, but Rosneft, the sale of Rosneft that didn't end up selling it to the Trump.
Well, that was
what they were
the
saying.
accusation.
So
So what actually ended up happening? I can't remember how much background I gave you on this.
You didn't. I just sort of looked it up, but it looked like to me what happened was the sale didn't go through you. It was brokered by someone else to an organization in the Cayman Islands that had something to do with Singapore or
No, not Singapore. You're confusing.
Malaysia.
No. Okay, so basically it was Glencore, one of the largest trading companies in the world. But they have a lot
That
of
bought
assets.
it.
They bought the 19.5% stake in Rosneft. Okay, so what's interesting? Did I tell you about the background on Glencore?
No.
Give me. Let's take a 20-second timeout. I'm going to find something for you. I'm sending you a really interesting piece.
They even have that sign. I saw that sign they have there. It's like
Read this when you get a chance, because this
Cool.
gives you a lot of interesting context. Where are you, Jeff?
We have such a great following in most of Europe, and we assumed that, and there was some interest, but it's just, I don't know, financially it was hard, it's expensive, I don't know. There aren't a lot of bands going there. There simply aren't a lot of promoters. I think that's what it comes down to. You need a good network of promoters, and I think I got the feeling it was pretty shifty. We were being paid by black money or dark money, or it wasn't all.
What was your promotion
We're used to
network
seeing
there?
a lot
What
of.
did you
We're used to seeing a lot of sponsorship, and we didn't see it there.
It's a beautiful
You don't remember the
area
venue,
for photos,
do you?
but hold on to your hat.
Okay. Yeah. No.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Of course.
Pick up the lamp. Thank you.
What's in Singapore?
Just some investor meetings, and then I have a couple of colleagues.
So we're offline now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know anything.
You turn it off, man.
He's fucking.
No, I'm turning it off. Yeah.
So one of the questions I get asked most frequently, is how is genetic engineering going to affect humankind in the future? And I got so tired of answering it from a scientific nonfiction point of view, I decided to 6 months ago, I started a fiction project. It's where I'm writing speculative fiction with a co-author, and I'm going to be exploring this idea for the future. But part of that future, about 200 years in the future, I'm predicting that these same issues we're talking about today they're not going away. They're going to be there forever. And I'm making a world in the future where we've run out of fossil fuels. And so we're forced as a people to go back. Imagine what that would mean. Fossil fuels are gone, and in this speculative work I'm doing, the government has outlawed batteries because they take too much input of fossil fuels to mine them and to refine them and get them to market. So there's no batteries either. And we have a grid that's run just by offshore wind and solar and maybe a little nuclear in there. So you have a grid, but everything is connected to the grid. But this idea that should power be centralized, so in my world, the government is in business with all these what we're calling gridcos, companies that service the grid, including agriculture. All the farming is done on the grid. These big agriculture implements are done because they're connected to an electric grid. It's very awkward, right? But a lot of people would look at our world today and say it's very awkward. There's a lot that's awkward about fossil fuels. But the point is, in creating this world of the future, it brings us back to a lot of the issues of today, which is we have enough fossil fuels, you could probably testify to this, that at our current rates of usage, we will never run out. Never.
Plus, when
That
you
means,
factor in new technologies, who would have predicted shale?
yeah, we simply will never run out of it. So I ask you, who is going to be the sector of society that's going to give up some of their conveniences so that we can use these new technologies? I don't know what the answer is. Now, in my book, this fiction idea I came up with, an invention that some brilliant scientist came up with, maybe 100 years from now, where they were able to sequester the poisonous, basically CO2, at the point of combustion, so that there are no fossil fuel, or there's no downside to burning fossil fuels.
You explain the science behind it in the book,
Yeah.
or
Yeah, it's
you can't-
speculative though. I mean, it's.
Have you sold the movie rights for this yet?
No, that's why you're the first person I'm elaborating this much with.
All right.
Okay, so we only recently, my agent told me like 8 months ago he wants to see. He gave me an assignment, and I delivered that assignment yesterday. So it's in development, but none of this should really get out. But the point is,
Well, he said you could probably testify to what he was saying. He didn't
Yeah.
mean like you, but he might have meant you might actually have to testify to this. So,
yeah, it's on tape now. but what that would do, if we came up with that invention, it would usher in, as I'm speculating in this book, an era of unprecedented global wealth.
and innovation.
And people who are now living in squalor would have at their disposal small, easy to access internal combustion engines with no downside to the atmosphere. It would usher in an unprecedented period of fossil fuel exploration and burning. And what I'm suggesting is within 100 years, we burn through all the remaining fossil fuels on the planet. And now we're really out of fossil fuels. And what's that world going to look like? It's not a dystopia. I don't like dystopian novels. But it's a fascinating world where we have to rely on the grid and what we can get from the environment. And it's not much. And so I'm saying it's going to take us another 250 years minimum before we really have to address these issues of who's going to give up their convenience. Right now we don't have to. And no one's going to do it. Not even the vegans in Brooklyn. They're not giving up their comfort, man. I guarantee you, where does that soy stuff come from? You know, someone's shipping it in on a diesel-powered vehicle. You know what I'm saying? So I'm just saying right now we don't have to make those choices. Who's going to give up their convenience? And it was getting to that question, why I came up with this world in the future. Because there will come a time when we have to, by necessity, make ends meet. And that will happen more through assimilation than through fighting. All right.
Mad Max 19. I think that is what you call that one.
No, that's a dystopian novel.
Yeah. So wait, this has a happy ending? Is that what you're saying?
It's a trilogy. Which means it's never going to end.
Harry Potter.
Thank you, Carter. I really appreciate it.
Get on it. So basically, okay, so Glencore. What's interesting about Glencore, the company that did buy the stake?
Yeah.
Glencore, if you go to their Wikipedia page and, you know, the basics on the company, it was founded by a gentleman by the name of Mark Rich. Does that name ring a bell? Mark Rich was under, you know, he was broke sanctions against Iran, right? And so he had he was under, you know, legal threat for a long time. All of a sudden, at the last day of Bill Clinton's administration, 2001, he gives him a pardon. So So what's suspicious about that? Well, you know, one of the big people that was funding the Clinton Library, you know, before they had the Clinton Foundation, which was a kind of nice pay-to-play format, this was their kind of earlier baby steps in the pay-to-play world where, you know, you scratch my back, you give money to my institution, and then you get some.
And is that illegal?
Well, there is. There are
read
two
it when
pieces. I sent you even the New York Times, which is very pro-Clinton. They referred to it as they undermine the pursuit of justice. What Bill did.
Bill. Yeah.
So they're saying that about Bill, and then there was big, long. You talk about hearings. If you read, there's like a 120-page document about the hearings that came in about that. Well, but I'm saying, you know, the bottom line. Let me just give you the executive summary. Is that, you know, there was a lot of deep connections between the company that did actually get it. So again, people, you know, it's so made up and so counterintuitive.
So this all ties back to the sanctions in the idea that somebody would benefit from the sanctions being lifted and the
idea is that Rosneft, who's, you know, the guy.
It's basically like insider trading, right?
Igor
off
Sechin.
the sanctions.
Igor Sechin, who's who runs Rosneft, the CEO of Rosneft. He. I think that one's done.
Okay.
We can take that one out. Thanks. So yeah, he was under sanctions. So I mean, this is all theory, right? But
So what? I mean, that's what. So what happens now, right? Like, so the ideal scenario would be sanctions are lifted for Russia. Sanctions are lifted, right? And the U.S. has normalized ties with Russia. But from my understanding, the 1,000-pounder elephant, or however you say it, is the Ukraine, right? In that Russia's invaded Crimea, and NATO feels like that's a creep towards their. This is my understanding, which is.
Well, there's a lot of misunderstanding. So, but it's you're kind of in line with conventional wisdom thus far. But
that's probably because I've gotten it from the media rather
so
than
here's
the horse's mouth.
Here typically you're actually much deeper than conventional wisdom.
Okay.
You've added a lot more detail because when 9 times out of 10 when you hear the basic report, they say. Full stop, Crimea. Russia took Crimea. So what led to that process? Crimea actually, you know, there was a referendum in Crimea. You know, there's a lot of steps. It's, I think 96% of the population, I forget the exact, but north of 90% were in favor of joining Russia. right? So, but let's rewind the tape a little bit. Everyone kind of starts in the beginning of, I think it was 2014 when they got, or
2014, yeah.
yeah. If you roll back the tape a little bit further, in late 2013, there was the Maidan Revolution in Ukraine, and the U.S. government, particularly a woman named Victoria Nuland, who was in close affiliation with Mrs. Clinton as well. She, you talk about influence on democratic processes here. If she's in the streets during this big revolution, kind of encouraging the protesters or the revolutionaries, handing out cookies in kind of right in the capital of Kiev. Yes,
Okay.
yeah. So, which kind of started this big chaos in the country to begin
Handing
with.
out cookies?
Huh?
Handing out cookies?
She was kind of, well, but she's supporting.
Yeah.
Actually, Petro Poroshenko, the president, he's quoted. If you read the kind of details about the just basics on the Wikipedia page for that, it talks about his. He specifically alludes to, her support being a major force, kind of spurred this revolutionary process. So again, just comparing like for like and actual real impact on democratic processes, that's actually something that, is...
Yeah, I just think that, that is Monday morning quarterbacking when there's an election that already took place.
Well, but I mean,
No, it's for an understanding...
There wasn't even an election,
Our
this is kind of...
election. Those ties... Hillary Clinton is pretty much for all intents and purposes, she's done with our...
Well, it's like I said, she's done, but, I mean, it's like I was saying, what you saw nonstop on the news this morning, I think it was kind of 75% of the news coverage. I had it muted out and was, watching MSNBC in the background. It's all about, this issue, right? And they're prosecuting the election on behalf of the losing side still to this day.
But what does, there's not going to be all I'm saying is so fucking what, right?
Well,
people get caught in it, like you, right?
Yeah, well, it's not just me. I mean, President Trump in the that 80-minute press conference I was referring to, he said, we've got, like Reince Priebus, his chief of staff, he spends about half of his time responding to these stupid, false allegations. So that's...
Well,
that's
I guess the other thing that suffers from that is the actual ability to get policy done
govern
in terms of
exactly.
Well, no, in terms of this issue.
Well, particularly
because now it's tainted,
more broadly,
right? Well, of course, but I think they figure out a way to implement the policies that they want to implement.
It's a great point,
but
Jeff.
with Russia specifically, with the Ukraine, it's tainted now forever. For a much longer time
That's
period.
the game. That is the game. And that is, there's a big, if you roll back the tape again, just to last year, the point that all of President Trump's then opponents were pushing is that, he's naive because he wants peace with Russia. He's a dreamer. Obama wanted to do that. George W. Bush wanted to do that. All these presidents want to do it. They failed. So basically, a lot of this is to say, a lot of this is to kind of prove, I told you so. This is something. He was always destined, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Carter, but the one country that had maybe much less of an impact on the election, but had an impact on the election. The one country that did that is the one that he wants to normalize relationships. Pick any other country, whether Iran or North Korea or whatever.
That was,
it's
but
really
that was before.
bad
but,
optics.
Okay, here's the bad optics.
Yeah.
Starting, and this is kind of one of the things that inspired me to support you. September 2015, he started giving speeches in favor of normalizing relations with Russia. Oh, shit, I've got this. I do have to take this call.
Take it. I mean, we can wrap it up if you want.
Yeah, Connie, call me in literally 5 minutes. Give me 5 more minutes, okay? Okay, thanks, man. Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we can finish another time. This has been awesome. Like,
I appreciate it. Yeah, no,
No,
it's
no,
been fun.
It's
talking
cool,
to
and
you.
I'm not like I said, I don't have any other reason behind doing this, and just to like get facts.
Yeah,
I'm not.
The facts.
I'm not a
are
journalist,
really,
so I don't.
Yeah,
I'm not in the conventional sense, right?
Yeah.
So I don't work like to tell. I tell the story of the people of that. So it's cool. It's cool to meet you, and I'm
Yeah,
hoping
it's
we can
great to meet
continue
you.
the
I look forward
conversation.
to it,
And
for sure.
yeah, and if I write about this, I'll definitely send it to you to look at before
Okay.
because it's
That'd be great.
cool, man.
And I do you do links in your articles?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
maybe, I might be able to kind of send you, it may give me ideas of things
No,
as
for
background.
sure, and
because
let's
I think,
continue
again,
the
detail.
conversation
I look
with
forward
all
to
this
that.
stuff. So,
Awesome.
good luck tonight, and crazy world you've fallen into, huh? It's not how you want to get famous, but
No, I don't.
yeah, let's grab a drink next time.
I look forward to it. Yeah.
I've had way too much coffee. Cool, man. Take care, and I'll let's hang soon. You live in the city?
Yeah, but I'm a lot on the road.
Cool. All right. Bye, man.